summary, brief summary of the Divine Comedy in terms of the three parts. Again, unforgivable what I'm about to do here in terms of, and scholars who are going to critique our comments, as of course they will critique our comments of anything we have said in any of our lectures, is that we're only working at the epidermal level, the surface level. And for that, let me apologize right away. First of all, the Inferno. Well, this is Dante the Pilgrim. Again, he puts himself in the poem in the same way that Augustine puts himself in Confessions, as we study. You got Dante the Pilgrim, who will be lost in a wood of error, wants to climb a mountain, turned back by three animals. Don't worry, we'll talk about it. And there he meets Virgil. Virgil will say to him, listen, I am sent to you from Beatrice, from paradise, and she has told me, you seem a little bit confused and lost, and it's my job to kind of walk you through the afterlife. I'm going to show you hell, then I'm going to show you purgatory, then I'm going to pass you off to Beatrice herself, and then finally St. Bernard of Clairvaux will be the last one who will help you find your way to paradise. Dante's like, okay, let's do this journey then. He journeys through 9 circles of hell. The circles of hell are kind of like, get the picture of a snow cone, okay? In other words, it's kind of big at the top and it comes down in a vortex. Later when we meet W.B. Yeats, it'll be the gyre. That's his word for this picture, this word picture, okay? That's kind of the construction of hell. 9 different circles of hell. At the very top we have the sins of incontinence. Think about it as lack of discipline, lack of self-discipline. Below that we have the sins of violence, and then below that the sins of fraud. It will shock a lot of students when they pick up Dante's Inferno to read it that thieves are actually considered worse than somebody who, for example, puts a 45 slug in somebody. Murder. It's quite remarkable. How is that even possible? Well, we'll talk about it, okay? In the center of hell, by the way, you don't have fire, you have ice. Put this in your notes. We don't have much fire in hell. And this is kind of an interesting question. Where did the idea of hell even come from? I have said this before in other lectures. Let's go ahead and say it again now. If you picked up the Bible, which is of course what Dante will be primarily referencing, along with his understandings of theology through Augustine and Aquinas, if you picked up a Bible and you pick up a yellow El Marco, and every time there's a mention of hell, you put an El Marco mark of the yellow line. By the time you finish reading the Bible, you're going to be stunned at how much El Marco you've got left. The amount of actual descriptions of hell in the entire Bible, Christian Bible, is stunning in its absence. You're not going to find much information there whatsoever. People who think they know about hell usually know about it through Dante. They just don't know that they know about it through Dante, a place where all kinds of punishments happen for sin. Now, let's put this in our notes right away. We'll come back to it. You don't go to Dante's hell because you sin. In Dante's world, everybody sins because we're all human. What makes you end up in Dante's hell is you sin and you refuse to repent. If you are legitimately able to repent and you're wanting to repent, you end up in Purgatorio, okay? And then, of course, ultimately you can move on to paradise. Got me? At the center of hell, though, we have ice, not fire. It's kind of fascinating. And there in the center of hell, you have Satan, and he's got 3 heads, 3 mouths, and he's chewing up for eternity 3 great traitors. In Dante's world, great traitors. Judas, who of course betrays Christ, that's kind of a no-brainer, and that's the middle mouth. But the other 2 are Brutus and Cassius, who, if you want to go back to your sophomore year when we studied Julius Caesar, Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, you'll remember that Brutus and Cassius betrayed Julius Caesar, but you'll remember that, especially Brutus, he kind of had good intentions for doing it. Some of you will have serious problems with the fact that Dante's going to put, Brutus in the mouth of Satan in the center of hell, especially given some of the people who are in hell above Brutus, who have probably done far worse things than what Brutus has done. But that's Dante's selection. By the way, let's put this in our notes as well. One of the funnest things about reading Dante, especially the Inferno, is to ask the question, why did you do what you did, and would I do it differently? So at the end of our time together with Inferno, I'm going to ask you guys, if you were to construct your own afterlife punishment, hell, Inferno, who would you put in there, and for what reasons would you put people there, and what would be the kind of punishments? Now, we're going to see this in hell. The punishment will always, we will say, fit the crime, and we'll kind of come back to this idea here in a bit. The second place of afterlife is Purgatorio. Here we have 7 terraces or cornices, kind of that will be represented by the 7 deadly sins. Here in Purgatory, we have more psychological kinds of renderings of sin, right? And we also learn in Purgatory that love can be both good, if it's love for God or others, but it can also be bad, especially if it's love of self, right? Well, Dante will make it through. He meets a pal there, and the 3 of them, they make it through Purgatory, and then Virgil will hand off Dante in Paradiso, in Paradise, to Beatrice. She will guide him through the 9 celestial spheres. The 4 cardinal virtues of Plato will show up here being celebrated, along with obviously the 7 virtues that are Christian. Here he will meet Aquinas. Here he will meet St. Peter as well as St. John. And then he will, for a brief moment, get to see the celestial light. That is to say, so much light that you're blinded. We're back, of course, to Plato, the Neoplatonists, and an influential a name that we mentioned when we did Augustine, Plotinus. Okay, all of that's going to factor. Well, that's the Divine Comedy in its overview. Let's now look at Inferno really quickly, and more particularly the 9 circles. Let's say a couple of things for your notes right away. Again, all this is overview. We're going to go through I'm going to give you a lecture on every single canto of Inferno, all 34 of them. So, in other words, when you finish, you will have not just read this poem with me, but we'll have had a lot of conversation at our 3 levels of reading. We'll get to that in a bit. First of all, let's say it this way. Hell looks a whole lot like, as we said, kind of a snow cone. In its literal instantiation, scholars have pointed out, hell looks a lot like Florence from the time that Dante lived there. Close, packed together, you got the city walls, and then inside everybody knows everybody's business, kind of like we're all in high school. Small town, so everybody knows everybody's business. But inside of hell, the deeper you go, the worse are the sins. Now, why it's constructed that way will challenge us here in a bit as we go through this real fast review. By the way, as we said, you end up in hell not because you sin, but because you refuse to repent, right? And the punishment will fit the crime. Now, or the sin? We don't really think about it as crime. We're thinking more about it as sin, okay? Well, what is that? Well, I'll give you just a classic example. If in your life, okay, you were a person who flattered or spoke gossip behind the back of another. Your friend walks up, and you're there with all of your friends, and oh, you look nice today, you say. But the minute that the person walks away, you turn to your friends and go, can you believe what she looked like? In hell, you're punished for that by being dumped in a river of human poop. Yuck. By the way, we're going to see a lot of these yuck word pictures, okay? Or some of you will say amazing word pictures. I think it can be both, right? And every time you come up for air, the demons will shut you down and you get this poop, human excrement, poop, back into your mouth again, and you're like trying not to swallow it, but you do, and you're shoved down, and then you come up for more air. In other words, if in life, see what we're doing here. This is the allegorical reading of these punishments. If in life you spit poop out in the form of nastiness or flattery or whatever, right? We even have this term, don't BS, which is a fair question. Why does what bulls drop out their rear end have anything to do with truth-telling? And the answer, of course, is Dante. He forever makes those two things. Anytime you've ever used the term, don't be a BS or whatever, you're talking Dante, you just didn't realize it. That is to say, in an afterlife, you swallow the poop that you, in your life, pushed out. Ugh. And some of you say, wow, that word picture alone makes me want to think the next time I start gossiping that maybe I shouldn't do it. That will be that question of, is hell a propedeutic, or the threat of hell? Can you scare the hell out of people? In other words, taking us back, of course, to John Edwards' classic sermon we studied together in our junior year, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. You can go back and look at that lecture again on learnstrong.net in our junior folder, right? Same gig getting played. Well, let's review really quickly the construction of hell. Again, we're doing lectures on each of the cantos so that we will break this down into minutiae. First, we've got the dark wood, right? And Dante is lost. Virgil will help him. Then we have what is often referred to as the pre-inferno, the anti-inferno. Here, you've got the nobodies, we might say about them. They sigh, and all they do is walk in a circle and sigh because they never could make up their mind one way or the other, and they never knew God. We finally get to the first official circle of hell. This is limbo. Dante had a problem. What's he going to do with all the people who were good people, but they were not Christians because they died before the birth of Christ and the crucifixion of Christ in all of that in AD 33? So what is it that you do with those guys? guys? Well, you put them in limbo. By the way, this is where Virgil lives, and this is also where Homer hangs out, as well as a number of other people that we'll get to. Then you get to the second circle of hell. This is the circle of the lustful, and they're blown around by a violent storm. That would make sense. Then we get to the third circle of hell. These are the gluttons. Of course, that's a major no-no in Catholic theology. You're not supposed to overeat. What happens to these gluttons is that garbage and nasty, putrid filth rains down on them all the time. We then go to the fourth circle of hell, and here we have the hoarders and we have the squanders, people that never share their stuff and people that couldn't get rid of the dollar in their pocket fast enough. And these guys push rocks around against each other. We'll get into why that's such an interesting word picture. The fifth circle of hell is next. Here we have the wrathful and the sullen, and we've moved now from the incontinent to the wrathful. And here they're caught in the mud of the river Styx, and it's nasty business for them. From there we get to the sixth circle. These are the heretics. These are people who disavowed the belief in God or tried to corrupt others from believing in God. They are locked in burning tombs. Again, anytime we see fire, we want to make a note of it because it doesn't happen very often in Inferno, believe it or not. We then move to the seventh circle, and we have three different rings of the seventh circle. The first ring is violence against neighbors, and they boil in blood. The second ring of seventh circle is violent against self, the suicides. Here the word picture is a disturbing one. If you're a suicide, you're a tree that gets jacked by harpies and torn apart over and over again. The third ring of the seventh circle is the violent against God. These are the blasphemers, these are the sodomites, these are the violent against art, and all of them are jacked in one way or another by fire. And again, as we've said, fire is not used a lot in Inferno, so we'll pay attention to that. We next go to the eighth circle, which is divided up into 10 pouches or bulgias, that is to say, kind of little special pockets, if you will. Pouch 1, the panderers and the seducers. They run away being chased by demons. The second pouch is the flatterers. We mentioned them already, buried in human excrement. That is to say, BS. The third pouch are the corrupt officers. They're buried head first in fire. The fourth pouch of the eighth circle are the diviners, the astrologers, the magicians. This is a compelling moment in Dante's Inferno. They walk in circles with their heads turned backwards, crying because now in life they always wanted to see the future. Now all they can see is the past, and they cry, and we're told that the tears run down their back because their heads are turned around through the cleft of the buttocks or the bottom. So it's a brutal picture, but it's kind of a compelling one. The fifth pouch of the eighth circle are the berators, those people who betrayed, for example, ships owners or anything they borrowed. They borrowed property and then they didn't return it. The sixth pocket or pouch is for the hypocrites. They walk in circles with lead robes on. Why, we'll get to. The seventh pouch of the eighth circle is where the thieves are, and they spend all their time looking for a home for their soul, being attacked by snakes. Think about the word picture already. We'll get to it. The eighth pouch is the fraudulent counselors, and here again more fire being thrown at these guys. The ninth pouch is the sower of scandals, and here they walk in a circle and they get sliced and diced. If you've ever heard that term, sliced and diced, it actually comes from this ninth pouch of the eighth circle. The 10th pouch, the final pouch of the eighth circle, are the falsifiers of metals, the counterfeiters, and here they have like terrible scabs all over their body. And if you've ever heard that notion of being a scab, this is kind of where it comes from. From the eighth circle, we go to the ninth circle, and here we'll have sub-circles, 3 circles within the ninth circle. The first is called Cana. This is for, of course, Cain, and these are traitors of kin. Obviously, Cain killed his brother Abel. They're frozen in a sea. I mean, when hell freezes over is a Dante line, okay? That's where it comes from. In this part of hell, it's a sea of ice, and these guys are frozen up to their neck, and they're just chattering the whole time. The second circle is the traitors to country and to party. We even have a guy eating on another guy's head. It's going to get gross. You could never make Dante's Inferno into an actual movie because it would just turn everyone's stomach. It's designed that way. Finally, in the third circle, well, here we're going to meet Lucifer himself in the center of hell, buried in ice, with 3 mouths chewing on Brutus, Cassius, and Judas, as we said already. Notice that in the upper part of hell, we're going to point this out in more detail in our lectures, sins where individuals lost control, right? And lust and gluttony comes to mind. In the lower part of hell, though, these are sins that required personal choice. And one of the things that Dante wants to say, which is why thieves, for example, or hypocrites get it further down than putting a slug in somebody's brain. Because the ripple effect, the more people who are affected, think about the traitors, for example. Think about the traitors that are traitors to their country. The more people who are affected, the worse is the sin, the greater is the punishment. Okay? Now, just to finish our lecture, how are we going to approach our study? Well, we have to say it out loud. We're always looking in our learning theory to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways. What does that mean? Well, several things, as we will say at the beginning of every lecture. My real hope is that by this point in our time together, you're willing to pick up your own version of the text, our volume, our Penske, we'll be working with the Penske volume. Pick it up and read it on your own, and then come to me for help and outlining to give you some sense of what you're reading. Of course, this connecting of new information to old information in meaningful ways we do in our learning theory. We're going to learn a lot about learning how to read from not just our study of St. Augustine, as we said already, but from our study of Dante. It's in many ways Dante who taught us how to read, and how to read on multiple levels. Of course, we answered 3 guiding questions, don't we? Level 1, what does the text say? Summary here is what we're looking for. Level 2, what does the text mean? Of course, we divide this into 2A themes, messages, and 2B. Now, at 2B, we're going to concentrate on looking at Dante from several different perspectives. No question, we're going to look at the same ways that we looked when we studied the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid, at symbolism and irony, and of course with Dante, allegory. We have to do that. But I really want us to concentrate on looking at Dante from 3 different perspectives. Dante is poet. Of course, that makes sense because of his love of Homer and Virgil, although again, he didn't read Homer, but he knew him, right? And especially, of course, his passion for epic poetry. Dante as politician, here he's an exiled poet. We're going to be looking at his views of conflict resolution. It's clear in the poem that Dante starts to figure out that politics is not going to be the way to solve the problems in Florence and anywhere else, for that matter. Finally, we'll look at Dante as philosopher, we might call him priest, theologian, his understandings and his uses of the Bible, and of course St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas can't get too far away from any of that stuff. He borrows heavily in his ideas, for example, of the ways that sin has to be punished from his reading of Aquinas. From Augustine, the question of free will. You have a choice to act and behave the way you act. Augustine will teach, and of course Dante will believe as well. And that's why you're in hell, because you chose to do something you could have repented for and you didn't repent. It'll always be in Inferno, when Dante has these conversations with people, that they're wanting to blame somebody else. They're not wanting to take personal responsibility for their mistakes. Finally, at level 3, we're going to ask, how can I relate to this information in some kind of meaningful way? At 3A, obviously other texts. And we will begin always by asking, how does what game Dante plays relate at all to the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, of course the works of Plato that we have studied together. I mean, that just makes sense, doesn't it? The ways in which we'll ask, how are those kinds of texts assumed? Of course, St. Augustine will have to. I don't believe you can read. I keep saying this. I think one of the most important single writers that we in the West have to read if we're going to understand Western thought is St. Augustine. I'm not alone, by the way, in making that argument. And for sure in our reading of Dante, no question, right? We're going to look, for example, the ways in which Dante borrows. Let me just give you one classic example. You can put this in your notes already, and we'll come back to it. His use of Ulysses. I mean, think about that. Ulysses, Odysseus, is defined as a guy that goes on a long journey. In fact, our word Odyssey actually, will tell us this, right? Of course, here we're going to have a journey. We're going to have a journey, an Odyssey as well, right? But Ulysses, Odysseus, ends up in all 3 parts of the poem. We're going to ask, where's Dante going to put Ulysses? I mean, hello, think about it. He's pretty much done every one of the major sins in Inferno. So where's Dante going to put him? We will see where he puts him and why. In Purgatorio, Ulysses will also be mentioned there. And finally, he'll even get mentioned in Paradiso as well. So it's fascinating. One of the reasons why I want you to read so closely Inferno is that you will then be drawn to pick up and read, I hope, the other 2 sections of the Divine Commedia, that is to say Purgatorio and Paradiso. Okay. Finally, and importantly, we'll ask the question at 3B, how can I relate to this information in some meaningful way? We'll come back to that in a moment. Let's point this out, though. Dante learned to read, and by read here we mean at multiple levels, from St. Augustine, and more particularly his Confessions. And you'll remember from our study of St. Augustine in Confessions, there's 4 kind of ways to read, right? You'll remember that when St. Augustine has his conversion experience, he's told, pick up the book and read. And he says in his Confessions, he read a special passage, and then from that moment he read no more. That's actually going to be echoed at some point in the Inferno. We'll get to it. But do you remember these 4 levels of reading? Think about them for a moment, and let's put them back in our notes. You can read at the literal level. That is to say, in our text here, that's just simply plot summary. Dante the Pilgrim's actual journey, right? Now think about the genius of this. Dante the writer is going to put Dante the Pilgrim inside of a poem where he begins in a dark word of error and he ends up in the light of the light of God himself in Paradiso. In other words, Dante the writer has an agenda in terms of the way he is going to grow or evolve himself as creation within the text. It's quite brilliant. But number 2, we'll have an allegorical reading. These are the hidden messages. Of course, we know all about this from our study of Plato's Republic, Book 7, the cave allegory. Some of you will say, that's why we worked with the cave allegory. Of course, it's an extension of Virgil's Aeneid, and of course the Odyssey, Book 11, and Virgil's Aeneid, Book 6, and the journey into the underworld. But it's way more profound than that, isn't it, right? Our study of the cave allegory in Republic 7. We're going to have a similar kind of thing going on here with the allegorical reading. This will, of course, for Dante's Inferno, we'll be tracking, and the rest of the Divine Comedy, we'll be tracking Dante's enlightenment, the social, political, think of it, the cultural, the scientific even parallels, and the patterns that will be evinced, right? Along with a literal reading and allegorical reading, we will have a moral reading. There's a moral, no question, and St. Augustine was huge on this. This is what we call propedeutic, right? The instructional, the didactic. It's all about human behavior. This, in that regards, is a poem about, you better be careful, a cautionary story. I mean, think about it. In Plato's Apology, he has Socrates say, the unexamined life is not worth living. That is to say, to examine your life